Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful panel discussion that we're going to have this afternoon on community schools. We have a terrific program for you this afternoon. We're going to start with Abe Fernandez telling us about community school strategies. Then we're going to hear a school department perspective from Emily Malozzi. And then the experience of what it's like to work in community middle and high schools with Dwayne Conway and Kristen Levesque. And then move to local perspectives in elementary schools with Matthew DeBloy and Cabot School with Rebecca Teachiff. And then we will move into some questions that we have for our panelists, and then hopefully have some time to take questions from the audience. So if you do have a question while our panelists are talking, please put it in the chat, or we will unmute mics during that portion of the program. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Abe Fernandez.
Great. Thank you so much, Martha, and really grateful to have this opportunity to be a part of this discussion. As you heard, I am based in New York City. I work for a nonprofit called Children's Aid, and I lead the National Center for Community Schools. I and my team have the great privilege of working with folks all over the country to start up, to scale, and to sustain community schools. And our work at the National Center is practice-based in that we leverage Children's Aid's experience as a lead partner organization to 19 community schools in New York City, as well as the experience of our client partners all over the country. And we've had the privilege of working with just about every major community schools initiative at some point or in some capacity over the last 28 years of our existence. I know our time is limited, and so I feel like we should just jump in here. My task this afternoon is to offer some thoughts about just what is the community schools framework, essentially to define what a community school is. So I want to offer a few different definitions. And so the first definition I want to sort of share is really a quote that comes to us from Pam Harvey from many, many years ago. And what I want to point out here is that she talks about a community school being a strategy and not a program. And so it's an important point because I think we've all been conditioned to think about the world in terms of programs and services and intervention sometimes. And unlike a program, a community school typically doesn't have a predetermined beginning, middle, and end, nor is there just one dedicated funding stream. The fact is that community schools change over time according to how the conditions, the needs, and opportunities change. This next definition is more of a kind of a textbook definition that comes from the National Coalition for Community Schools, and we at Children's Aid are a founding member of that coalition. Instead of reading it to you, again, time is really tight here, I guess I'll just highlight a couple of really, I think two things about this that I really appreciate. One is that this definition references community schools being both a place as well as a set of partnerships, right? So there are there's physical and non-physical, relationship-based aspects of this strategy, which I think is really important to point out. Second, I think I really appreciate the results orientation that you see referenced here. The theory being that community schools are not only able to influence student learning, but they can also strengthen families and even impact the neighborhoods where our students and families live, right? It positions the school as a place where change can ripple outward far beyond the walls of the schoolhouse. And then finally, the last definition I'll share with you is sort of a much more involved graphical definition. It's what we call our developmental triangle. And I could spend an hour talking about this, but I'm going to try to spend 2 minutes on it. It's important to start right in the center of this graphic. And you'll notice that there's this firm belief that community schools are and should be child-centered, right? So we sort of always have kids at the center of our conversation. That also means recognizing that they're parts of family systems and that those families are parts of communities. And we want to engage all those folks in this work. But this is a triangle. There are 3 sides to this work here. And so I want to highlight those 3 sort of core components that make up this work. The first one is on the left side, the core instructional program. And we start with this side very intentionally to emphasize that high quality instruction is really a key part of this work. On the right side of the triangle, we have expanded learning opportunities. And that word expanding is doing a lot of work here. We're thinking about it expanded in terms of expanded time. So thinking about a longer day, week, year, expanded engagement, right? So different ways of engaging young people and their families in learning and healthy development. And then finally, expanding in terms of staffing. So thinking about how to leverage the community and partnerships to expand the capacity of a school. And then finally, at the base of the triangle, the last side of the triangle, are these comprehensive support services, which you might think of these as being supports that remove barriers to learning. And this takes on different forms, of course, everything from individual and group therapy, all the way to direct material assistance like coats or food, depending on what the needs are. And so there you have the three sides of this triangle spelled out, except that we're not quite there yet. I have been in many schools that have done a fantastic job getting a bunch of programs in the building, and they've really been able to get lots of things happening along all three sides of the triangle, but they're still not community schools. In fact, I often describe some of these schools as doing random acts of programming, right? There's lots going on, but it's not clear who's doing what, for whom, whether it's making a difference, if we have the right kids engaged in the right stuff. It's just kind of random. So the final part of this definition is what's happening at the vertices of the triangle, how these pieces align together, how they really leverage each other, how they're integrated and coordinated. I'll conclude with one last idea here, which is that it's all about capacity. The fact is that this work of a community school does require additional capacity, and the level of coordination that I'm describing here doesn't happen by itself, and principals cannot do all this work by themselves. And this is where the role of a community school coordinator comes in, and their central work is really to create the systems that bring all these pieces together. They really do a lot of work making the vertices of the triangle come to life. And so with that, I'll conclude, and I'll look forward to the Q&A.
Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Malozzi. I am the program manager for Pawtucket Community Schools. I'm also a community school coordinator, and I have one elementary community school that I serve. I am here today to give us an overview of how our school department implemented the community school initiative. And so I'm starting off by telling you a little bit about our city of
Emily, your sound is going in and out.
Okay, is it any better now?
Let's try that.
Is it any better now?
No, maybe with the video off.
Okay, is it better now with the video off?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So just to recap, my name is Emily Malozzi. I am the program manager of the Pawtucket Community Schools Initiative. I am also a community school coordinator stationed at one of our community schools here in the district. I am here just to give us an overview of how our district kind of started the community school programming here. And I'm just starting off with telling you a little bit about our city in general. So Pawtucket, Rhode Island, we were founded in 1671. We are an old historic city. We are the fourth largest in the state of Rhode Island, which is the smallest state in the United States. Our background is textile manufacturing, and we have about 75,000 people in our city. We are one of the 4 urban core school districts in the state, and we're often referred to as the sister school district of the city of Providence, which is our capital city. We have 16 schools in our district, about 750 educators, and right around 8,500 students. And then I just listed some demographic data there so you can get a sense of our population. As indeed, we are very diverse. Next slide. The story of how we got started with our communities initiative in Pawtucket. So our initiative really started from our teachers union. Our union, the Pawtucket Teachers Alliance, was away at a conference sponsored by the American Federation of Teachers, AFT. And AFT is a large proponent of community schools. So our teachers union leadership learned about what community schools were, and a light bulb went off. They were like, yes, this is the way schools should be done. They saw that there was this need for community schools in the city of Pawtucket, and that it would benefit not only our students and families in a large way, but also teachers. And so they brought this idea back to our district administration, and together they spent the next couple years planning and collaborating and creating this really interesting union and district administration partnership to get this initiative off the ground. They sent teams to conferences to learn more about it, brought in speakers and people who could share more information. They targeted one of our elementary schools and started working on staff buy-in and education. And from there, they together wrote a grant that was from the American Federation of Teachers. It was a seed grant called the Innovation Fund. And what that grant did was get us started with community schools. It was a 3-year grant to, just like I said, seed money to get us started. And so the following year, they hired me to start the program. I was the first community school coordinator hired in the district. Keep in mind that we didn't have any other staff, nobody at the district level or anything like that. And we started our first pilot school. The following year and the following year, we hired again 2 other community school coordinators and expanded into 3 schools. Then 2020 came, and that was the end of our seed grant. And we transitioned all 3 of our staff positions of those community school coordinators. They were absorbed into the district budget, and that's basically where we're still at today. I should say that that Innovation Fund grant that we were awarded did have a district match to it. So there was already some money on the table from our school district. And I think that helped make the full transition easier when the time came when that grant ran out. Just some things to note. Just some things to note back on that previous slide is that all 3 of our community schools are at the elementary level. We are the only community school initiative in the state of Rhode Island. Okay, good, next slide. And so our community school strategy really focuses on these 4 pillars: expanded learning opportunities, which are before and after and even during this day programming, integrated student supports, which offer lots of partnerships to increase access and remove barriers. So we really engage the community to help expand these student supports in our school. And you can see some of the examples located on the side. Collaborative leadership is also a large factor of community schools. This was a big one for us since our initiative is led by our teachers union. Collaborative leadership means that our community school coordinator works alongside the school principal to run the school and help make decisions. And that community school coordinator is constantly bringing in voices from the community, the students, the parents to help make school-based decisions. And so that's really what overall that collaborative leadership is. And then lastly, family and community engagement, which tends to happen naturally if you're doing all of those other things, but there is intentional on it. And overall, it is improved communications and that systems for involvement. And you can see again the examples on the side. We've seen improvements in attendance, math and ELA scores, family participation, teacher efficacy, and school and culture and climate. Also, what Abe said is very it does come down to community school coordinators. You can't do community schools without them. It is too much work. You have to be intentional with the work, and community school coordinators are very much needed. We also did a ton of school training. Every time we onboarded a new school, we would do a full staff training. We would bring that whole school staff together and go over what community schools are. We've also attended conferences a few times, but when you can't do that, it's definitely beneficial to create some type of training that you can use within your own district. We also start with the needs assessment, which is super important to just gather some baseline data. And because every community school is different, you need to figure out what that community needs. And so we survey all the different stakeholders, gather some data, and then from there, we can plan programs and partnership, very intentional. To date, we have over 100 partnerships created with the community at large, and our community schools are run by community school advisory councils. And then I did just end with some resources there. These are the ones that we've really used to get started in our district, and then some funding idea if anybody is interested in exploring community schools further. It is an ESSA-based school improvement strategy. It can be funded by Title I. It can be funded by Rescue Plan, URSA money. There is a separate federal grant, as Abe also said. It can be funded through a variety of different ways, and there's lots of resources out there. You just gotta find them. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us today. I'm Dwayne Conway, and as Dana said, I was the principal at Miranda Cook Community High School. I was there for almost a decade, and then a little bit ago accepted a job as a dean at a local community college. So over that past decade, I worked with Kristen, who is the current principal of Miranda Cook Community Middle School. So thank you for having us today. Middle school and high school are on the same campus. We were, and I say were because I was there, but they're separated by just a driveway. Roughly 300 students at the middle school and 400 students at the high school in grades 6 through 12. A great variety of families, SES levels from the 5 sending towns. We're really a rural area that's filled with lakes and just a very pretty area. And to piggyback on that, Kristen and I used to do freshman home visits when she was at the high school. And we got to see just a great variety of where our students lived and really got to know them well and their struggles.
So along those lines, one of the most important and well-known parts of our school system at the middle and high school level would be our advisory system, which has been around since 1976, which is when the schools opened up. We originally started as a 6 or a 7-12 school, and then it ultimately became a middle school with one building, and then across the way was the high school on that same campus. But we have a 6-12 advisory system. So in the middle school, the kids are with the same advisor or, the same adult, caring adult for their 3 years throughout the middle school. And then the high school, same thing, they're with the same caring adult for about 4 years. This is more than a homeroom. It's super involved. The staff members become almost like a quasi-parent at the school. And there's between like 8 and 10 or 11 kids in an advisory group. So they really get to know, we work really hard to make it diverse. Like Dwayne had said, that there's a huge, the SES is very interesting in the area. There's people who have, a ton of money versus those who are just really struggling to get by. And this gives the kids all an opportunity to get to know all the students, regardless of what classes they may or may not have been in. It provides all the kids with a caring adult that it's almost like that backup of you can go to your advisor. And we know that sometimes there's going to be other adults in the building that student may feel more comfortable going to. But we like to see it as just another, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say a kid has too many caring adults in their life, right? So that's what we try and promote, and having been there for years for both of us, it's been huge. So
I think with that, with the advisor piece, we constantly redirect issues back to the advisor so that they're the main point of contact for that child, and that involves discipline issues too. The advisor is usually involved with those.
Right. In talking about discipline, we can also think about restorative practices. Both the middle school and the high school use restorative practices, and we believe in the concept of restorative practices. So as you can see in that chart, we really try, not that we always do it, right? But we try as hard as we can to be in that quadrant that says with. So anything that we are doing that involves a child, we want it to be done with them or with their family, right? Or with their teachers. It's not being done to them. So it's not like, I gave someone a detention. That's something that something or whatever it might be, it's something that is done with someone, right? We don't ignore things, so it's not neglectful, and we're not doing things for kids. You want it to be something that the kids can own and empower them to take control of their life in whatever they might have done. So if it is a disciplinary issue, it's already been done. So what do they need to do now to make it right? And that's a conversation that we have with the kids and with their families and with the victims or the other people that would have been involved.
All right. So with this, it's interesting to talk about it. I know when I was first hired and interviewed, it kept being refocused. I would talk about Maranacook, and I was always told it's a community school by the hiring group, and that really helped ground it for me. So I just want to give them props that there was a system in place that we were able to jump into and kind of expand upon. But we both super believe, and the community believes, that the schools should be the hub of the community. And that involves certainly having sports there, having the community. Sometimes for me, it was almost uncomfortable how much the community was there. But you have to promote that, you have to deal with it, and then balance it along with safety considerations. We have a huge volunteer group that our central office actually manages that does a great job for us.
And I know we're coming to a close with our time. So we just wanted to finish up a little bit talking about other ways that we support our community, knowing that we've all gone through so much with COVID, and just making sure that we are working with people and meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, I think you had said it really well before, and keeping everyone as individuals, looking at them as individuals, and just knowing that when you're dealing with them in a classroom, in a discipline situation, wherever, everybody has their own needs.
And again, this is just going back to that, there's that political division and the hidden diversity. We're in a pretty, if you were to look at the kids in our school, a lot of them look similarly, but that doesn't mean that there's not diversity in other ways. And it's really important. We strive to promote being inclusive. It's not about being tolerant. You need to be more than tolerant. You need to be inclusive and listen to all ideas and try and bring people together, not promote a divide.
Hi there. My name is Matthew DeBlow. I'm the principal at Virgins Union Elementary School. I've been here about 6 years, and I've been in the district about just over 20 years. And I'll say that if you don't know where Virgins is, we're on the west coast of New England, nestled in between Burlington and Middlebury on the kind of Route 7 corridor. The Agency of Education in the state of Vermont put out a grant program not too long ago. So we were really in the infancy of our award as part of this from the ESSER money. So we applied for over the summer and received just this fall a grant to work on our community school. And part of that work was really focusing on thinking about what we're missing. So if you could go to the next slide, please, that would be great. So like, these are some of the things that we thought about over time and trying to ascertain what is it that we can bring to our school to make it a community school? Because as was mentioned before, like I have a fair amount on my plate as the school principal, and there were some things that I saw and that others saw as we thought about this grant that we wanted to include as part of our community. And there are hidden parts of our community that we don't necessarily bring into our building. We have a lot of changing demographics in Vermont, as there are in New England, as there are in the United States. So, you know, we're how do we make the school a more visible part of the community? We're literally right in the center of town. The high school is just across the field from us. Now, through consolidation, we're all part of one continuous piece of land that is abutted by some recreational facilities that at one point in time were all part of the school district. So how can we really build things for the community that that bring opportunities for our parents, our community members, and our students together in one focus area? So we've done a lot of work as a city because Vergennes is a city with the city recreational program and through some work on developing memorandums of understanding between both ourselves and the city, ourselves being the school district, to create greater recreational opportunities between for adults and children in our community. So if you came to this building, you would park in a parking lot, and it would look like we have an outdoor pool, some tennis courts, a skating rink that's a little bit underwater right now, and a skate park. But parts of all of those kind of facilities mentioned just now are actually city facilities. So how do we create opportunities to make sure that we're having a thriving culture of recreation, to make sure that that we have that. So now this is my biggest problem, is talking briefly. So really trying to think of what are those other pieces. So we could just go to the next. So there you go. Next slide. How do we kind of complement the 21C programming that we have and bring more opportunities for adults? How do we bring some of our we're a relatively rural area that has a lot of dairy farms with migrant farmers on those that work in those areas, and how do we encourage folks to come into the building to provide opportunities for learning? How do we capitalize on the not very many people that we have to leverage leadership within our community that doesn't ask them to do something different, but ask them to do something more collaborative? So really tying together our 21C and our community schools grant, and having someone be the champion for that, and work to develop a common garden plan, a mentoring program, some increased recreational opportunities that really tie the school to the community and the community to the school. And really think about, you know, what are those opportunities that we can create for students, and what are those opportunities that we can create for adults that build a better understanding of, for students, of what goes on in our community, and for our community of what we're trying to do for students. And so again, we're in the infancy stages. We're doing a lot of planning and build up in order to create an effective program. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Becca Tatisha. I'm the principal at Cabot School. Cabot is located in sort of the center of Vermont, and it is where Cabot Cheese or Cabot Creamery is also located. So if you're familiar with that, many people are familiar with that and have never been to Cabot. And so, but we're a really small town. And so I'm going to just, before you go on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about this particular photo because I think it's important that we bring young people and bring their perspective into conversation. So this photo really summarizes our approach. We're a pre-K-12 school. We are multi-age in the best of senses. And so This photo is of students who are from grade 5 to adult, hiking together. And one of the things that we do as a part of being a community school is really thinking about how do we create networks that are multi-age, multi-generational within a really small town. So I'll talk a little bit about our demographics. We are very small. We're 166 students. That is from age 3 to age 19. Some of our seniors. And we're about 10 percentage points higher than the state average for serving students with disabilities. We are considered a high poverty school. We serve students who are about 50% receive free and reduced lunch. We are predominantly white as a student body and faculty. And that's something that we've been thinking a lot about in terms of our equity and inclusion work. And we do not serve currently any students who are English language learners. We are like our partner Vermont School in Vergennes at the center of our community, physically and sort of in all ways that one can be sort of at the center. We're on the common, we're in the village, we're the second largest employer. And I think that's really important to note. The other thing is that we are one school community. So being a pre-K-12 school means that when I came 2 years ago, we operated in sort of these segmented ways. And a lot of our work through being a community school has been to start to build ourselves as one school from pre-K to 12 so that young people who are in 3rd grade know older students well. We want to make sure that our staff across grades know each other well. It's really easy to be isolated. We're a campus school with 7 buildings. And so we've implemented a couple of key sort of structures around that as a part of being a community school and as a part of really thinking about coherence. One is a staff crew structure. The other is a student leadership team that really looks at bringing 6th graders as elementary representatives into the fold along with their middle and high school counterparts. And I say that this is all a part of a community school strategy. I love that Abe talked about it as a strategy, not a program, because we're really looking at webs of relationships and networks of connection. And so we are in a very small town, and that means that it's important that we know individual people. We're looking to revitalize partnerships with families and community members. So we just started actually this week an after-school program. There had not been an after-school program here for 10 years. We were able to do that with the vision of a community coordinator and the partnerships with our library, our community theater program, our community arts programs, we have a rec committee that's very active, and parents. And so our after school programming is student facilitated with the support of adults. It is primarily rooted in partnerships that are local. And by local, I really mean like in the town that we are in, whether through parents or community-based partners. And really, again, looks at building those networks of support. So we have almost 50% of our elementary school students and about 50% of our high school students have signed up to help to be in this first rendition of an after-school program. We also focus again on those networks, thinking about local resources. Our students our 1st and 2nd grade students are currently engaged in a maple sugar study. Our students in high school are engaged we sit at the headwaters of the Winooski River. They're engaging in studying the headwaters. And that brings in folks who are involved with the sugaring industry, involved with local sort of environmental tasks. And so I think really our work as one school that's engaged in thinking about networks together, you can go on to the next slide, is that we are Crewnut Passengers. And so we work alongside our families and our community partners to really think about how to support the lives of young people in a holistic way.
Okay, thank you so much for all of those wonderful presentations about not only the strategy, not the program that Abe referred to, but also the place and partnerships that he spoke of in the beginning of these discussions. And so, you know, in an effort to avoid the random acts of programming, which I really love and would like to use in the future with credit. One of the questions that comes up a lot about the, you know, when people are considering community schools or different strategies to creating more inclusive collaborative schools is, where do we begin, right? How do we get started? And so I'm wondering if the panelists might talk a bit about what are the things that you wish that you knew at the beginning of this process. So anybody is free to jump in just to let us know what you wish that you knew when starting this work in community schools.
I'll go. This is Emily Malozzi from Pawtucket, if you can hear me. I would say just starting out, I wish we had planned a little bit better for assessment and evaluation. When you're starting something new, it's very important to show effectiveness along the way. And in order to keep it and sustain it, you're going to constantly have to talk about it, and having data there is so, so important. A lot of times I've seen grants that will call for that really specifically. What is your evaluation plan? And so I think that helps you think about it. But if you're, you know, looking at a grant that doesn't have that, it's definitely something to think about. If you don't have any systems in place for overall evaluation, how are you going to know that this is successful? That way you can keep getting funding and it can keep growing. So that is just definitely something to think about. There's always available data from our schools because we're used to doing that type of work. But then when you're starting to, you know, bring in all these other programmings and partners and these different people, and you're starting to look at school data differently, you might want to be able to track school culture or parent participation or hours served for community service, different points of data. So how are you going to capture that? And I would definitely say, looking back, I wish we planned a little bit better for that.
Thank you, Emily, for those words of wisdom and good advice. And Becca, did you want to add?
I was thinking about that idea of beginning, and I would say that one of the things, and I came 2 years ago, so there were already a lot of roots here, is that it was less about where to start and more about finding connection to the places in which we were already connecting with community. And there are a lot of places in all schools, there are places where you're connecting with community. And really thinking about, how do we elevate those? How do we build on them? How do we grow them? So that, I think for us, there wasn't so much like a clear start. There's like a funding source, and that's a thing, but we can't, if we're a real community school, we're not going to stop being a community school when the funding source is not there. And so I would just encourage folks to think about, like, in what ways are we already connected and a part of and in those networks of connection with community.
Thank you. That's such an important perspective. But you're not starting fresh ever. they're always the strengths and the supports and the connections that already are existing within your school community. We'll go to Matt next, and then Abe, and then Kristen and Dwayne.
I guess just to briefly add, like, I think the willingness of the school community is important, because if I think along with those connections, you know, is the community willing to engage in the process? Because it's not something that can happen in an inorganic way. So just knowing your community well is important.
Yeah, and they have to be willing partners, right? Abe.
Yeah, you know, I just want to share a couple of lessons we've heard from folks around the country around this is a really great question. One of them is, I think people realize pretty quickly that this is more than just an efficient service delivery strategy, right? Which I think is how a lot of folks start thinking about this. And they quickly realize that it's actually a way to engage multiple stakeholders in the work of schools and sort of supporting kids and families. And so the other sort of important lesson here is that I think a lot of people have learned that this is oftentimes much bigger than just talking about schools and districts. This is about entire communities, entire systems that we've developed that touch down on kids and families also being engaged in this work. And so one sort of mistake that I think some folks make is that they're only thinking within the confines of education and are not thinking about how to leverage the healthcare community, how to leverage the early childhood community, how to engage the business community in this work. Everyone has a stake in kids being successful. And so all those folks should be at the table as well.
Yes, thank you so much for that reminder. And that's something that we concentrate on a lot, how many different people within communities exist that are invested in and available to support kids in their education in the largest sense. So yes, thank you so much for that. Let's see, Kristen and Dwayne.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to say is, one thing I have learned over time is just realizing how communities change every year, right? So we have a mentoring program, but that's had to adapt, obviously, since COVID's happened, but every year it should look a little bit different. It just needs to be about always wanting to improve, but also to be aware of where the community is at, where your kids are at, and what you need to do to make it better.
Yeah, thank you. And that actually leads into the next question about how complicated it is when you're working in these structures, frameworks, approaches, and things are constantly changing, moving parts, pandemics happen. How do you think about and plan for sustainability over time? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'll talk a little bit. I mean, I think making sure that the pace is a sustainable pace, I think, is important in developing the structures and routines that just to make sure that the average school leader in Vermont is like 3.5 years. So just making sure that there's some continuity kind of beyond the expectations of the community, so that those partnerships exist continuously, and that there's an understanding that, like, the most important thing to do is adapt and to be comfortable with the change. Because although I think a lot of organizations talk about, like, the reluctance of schools to change, like, if schools are good at one thing, it's changing. I mean, just to acknowledge the things that happen that are expected. I mean, I think if you ask anybody that works in this building, they'll tell you that they know that statistic about administrators in the state of Vermont, because I remind them all the time, so that they understand that the expectation is we're building for the future of the organization, not someone's personal legacy.
That's such an important point. And as a reminder, if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the chat for us. But if you're building frameworks that rest on collaboration and networks, it can't rest solely on one person's shoulders, right? But we often place that burden on individuals. So yeah, thank you for that. Other thoughts about sustainability or working into the future. And Emily, I was thinking about your point about data, how important it is to evaluate, but go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note as well, I'll say that I think the easiest, most simplest thing everybody can do to work towards sustainability is just talk about community schools. Do the advocacy work, do the promotion, be a PR person, post on social media, tell stories, invite people into your schools and show them what you're doing. Tell them about that data, make formal presentations, have your elevator pitch ready to go and tell it to everybody who will listen. And I think that speaks to what Abe was saying about being able to tap into the other systems that are at play, because when you tap into those other systems and you work together, it really opens up different funding streams for you. And you create these champions of community schools. You want everybody to be talking about this because everybody does have a stake in it. And so that shared accountability that you create with this collaborative leadership is really how you're going to work towards sustainability.
Yes, thank you for that reminder how important it is to be an advocate. Let's see, well, Dwayne and Kristen, and then we'll open it up. If people have questions, please use the raise your hand feature and we'll make sure that we get you unmuted to ask.
Yeah, so sure, just to tag on to that real quick, and as well said, I think as a leader, you're always championing other people to be involved. And that just takes a super lot of effort. So I think you have to be, kind of protective of yourself in many ways. Realizing that, I think for both of us, like school was our main focus, but that's a hard way to always be. Like you still have to dedicate time to yourself and family and all those other aspects.
That's an important point of, again, not taking so much of the burden on yourself that it's that you burn out, that it really does take many people, and that many of the things that you all have talked about are incredibly labor intensive. Becca.
I think one of the complicated pieces about sustainability is that the question for me always comes up of like, what and who are we trying to sustain? And so I think for me, the most important piece is having at that core, what are our values and beliefs around this work? And then the structures may change, not relying on funding sources as the reason that you're a community school, I think is really important. So thinking about sustainability as what we're sustaining is a set of value, core beliefs, and kind of mindsets that are going to change and evolve over time because our communities are going to change and evolve over time. And if we reframe sustainability, for me, that's helpful partly because I'm like, oh, that checklist that I was going to do didn't get done. And then, we have a tendency to sort of go through like, I had this plan and it didn't work out. Does that mean it's unsustainable? And so if we go back to core values and beliefs and mindsets as the thing that we're trying to sustain, for me, that's a little bit easier to latch onto. And more energizing as a leader.
That is such an important point, and I can see Abe nodding his head. Abe, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just want to co-sign that and maybe add that in addition to the values, and I really think Becca's right, that being clear about what it is you're trying to sustain is so important. And we feel that when people talk about sustainability, they go straight to like, well, what's the funding we're going after? And instead, the first step should be talking about values, talking about what's our results framework, and also building a broad base of support in your community for this concept. That if it's just a small group of people, if just the leadership is on board, we all know those folks come and go. And so we want to make sure that this is really a part of the fabric of how this community wants to move forward. I do just want to highlight that from a national perspective, the community schools movement, which is a very old movement. I mean, this idea is not new. It's been around for a very long time. We're like having this very unprecedented moment right now. There's more funding, more attention, going to this strategy than ever before, certainly in all of our lifetimes, probably. And so I do think that this is the time to get folks to really engage in this conversation. The U.S. Department of Ed is likely, they've already recently put out priorities for the next round of full service community schools grants. We believe that is going to drop at some point in spring. And so I wouldn't wait until that comes out to start having these conversations. Just want to urge people to, to take advantage of the moment that we're in, to at least get some initial stable funding that's very focused on this kind of work, to get your ideas to move to the next level.
Thank you. Those are, I think, perfect words and thoughts to wrap this up with. Unfortunately, we're getting to the end of our time together, but I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for being with us today and sharing your experience with community schools and that framework from many different perspectives. And I really appreciate the time that you've taken to be with us this afternoon. And with that, let's see, it looks like Abe put his email in the chat. If any other of our presenters are willing to answer questions after the seminar, please let us know, put your email in the chat. And with that, I will hand it over to Dana.
Thank you so much, Martha, and thank you so much to all of our really wonderful presenters. I learned a lot, and it just invigorates me to know that there are so many great community schools out there doing this work. So thank you to everyone else for being here and attending. We do have some mental health technology center, transfer center resources that we'd love to invite you to use. They are all freely available on our products and resources catalog. Some that we'll highlight for you are the National School Mental Health Best Practice modules. We have a trainer manual, a participant manual, as well as an 8-part webinar series. We also have an online course to help increase mental health literacy for classroom teachers called Classroom Wise. That's freely available. At the Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative, we have several resources, including a topical resource directory that's organized by topic. That includes some blog posts with practical tips, as well as toolkits and webinars on a variety of school mental health topics. One resource that we'd love to highlight is our Schools This Year suite. It's a really important toolkit about going back to school, thinking of all of the grief and trauma that COVID-19 has brought on our teachers, students, and our families, as well as the larger school community and how we can address that. It includes a practical slideshow that you can use as a training device or pull out small tips to help encourage trauma responsive practices in your school community. One of our key toolkits is our Compassionate School Response to Mental Illness. And then we also have a training library that helps you see all of the past Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative trainings like this one that are available for use in your school communities as professional development tools. All of these are linked on this slide when you receive this slideshow, so make sure to check out our products. And we'd also like to highlight our Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative online course. This is a very comprehensive 12-hour course. You get continuing education hours with it. We also are helping to give you some guidance on this, so you can reach out to us if you have any questions about this course. It really takes you through the whole journey of how to cultivate a compassionate school community that responds to trauma effectively, building up or refining your own comprehensive school mental health system. We hope that you will join us in some of our upcoming school mental health events linked in the slideshow. Our registration links to our next 2 events on April 21st at 4 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be hearing from some youth leaders, as well as family advocates and community organization advocates to talk about the importance of stakeholder voice engagement and advocacy to enhance collaborative school-based mental health systems. And then on April 25th at 3 p.m., we have another panel presentation with some various perspectives on youth suicide prevention, equity-based options from the field. So come and hear more about those 2 topics with us next. Our we do thank you again for coming to this webinar. Our funding does come from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which requires us to evaluate our services. Our technical support manager, Ingrid, will put the link to this very brief evaluation survey in the chat. You can also use your phone to scan the QR code on the screen. Attendees that provided their email address will also receive this survey 24 hours after the close of today's event, along with today's slide presentation. This follow-up email will include a link to request a continuing education credit or participation certificate. We appreciate your honest, anonymous feedback, which does help us provide information to SAMHSA and assists us in planning future meetings and programs. Your feedback really does count. For more information about those continuing education hours and certificates, contact the New England Mental Health Technology Transfer Center at New England at mhttcnetwork.org. And please stay posted to our website, which is listed on the slide, for the links to the video presentation and related slides for this event and many others. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about resources to support mental health. For any questions specifically about the School Mental Health Initiative or the Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative, please contact Dr. Martha Staley or myself. Our emails are listed there. We thank you so much for joining us today. Please also look in your follow-up email for a link to join our Basecamp platform, where we post resources around school-based mental health on a regular basis. Have a great evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Take care of yourselves.